to this first, going to go to this assessment here, which is the main project. And you've gone in there and you've downloaded the organisational chart, the assessment document and the student workbook, which has a lot of the information. It's pretty big, but you've got all three of those downloaded. So I'm going to go through it bit by bit. So have your little workbook open. It's very useful, so you can refer to that if you can't find an answer or you missed what I said. Open the brief. Again, put your name, and also note you can use the draw tools in Word to just do a signature where it asks for a signature. So you just switch to draw up there and then go back home to type again. So make sure you do put your name and student number on there and everything, and then go back to the text tools. Okay, so let's have a look. We've got several things we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at 4 tasks. So we're going to learn how to identify and address and report risks and hazard. And then we're going to look at legislation. So what's the actual law? And then we're going to look at how you make an incident report, and you're going to do an incident report. And then how do you respond to an emergency? So there's a few things we'll have to stop and do, like going and finding an evacuation plan, there's a few things you're going to have to wander off and maybe take a photo of and then come back again. So we'll talk about that as we get up to them. So there's 4 tasks. So it's just repeating that there's 4 tasks there. And we're trying to make it relevant to the scenarios you've been involved in. So we've got a scenario. So you are, let's correct that, you are employed as a graphic artist in a small design studio, which is a computer-based work environment. Your team works for various clients that involve publishing, digital illustration, graphic arts, logo creation and branding. Each workstation is equipped with 2 large monitors on a desk. There's a mixture of workstation areas, some in an open planned environment and some in private closed spaces. Your immediate line manager, Julius Stickler, who works off-site, is keen to hear your thoughts on improving the work environment to create enhanced productivity and improve mental health. She has requested that you can conduct a risk assessment of the studio and staff to outline any risks or hazards. So we're going to look at what kind of risks or hazards there could be in a design studio and how to manage them. So you have made these observations. So there are some problems that get identified. So the light area is very bright. It's mostly from natural light, which is good. However, when seated at the desk, you're looking directly into bright lights from the window outside. So we already talked about that. So, there's probably something that can be done pretty quickly about that, just in terms of changing the position. The environment inside the office is noisy, as the overhead fans and air conditioning create background noise that is constant. So that's going to be some kind of effect on people's ability to actually function and work. Some chairs don't have adjustable height. There's probably something we can do about that. There are no adjustable desks. Some workers are eating and drinking at their desks. Some staff members are using a spray adhesive in a common area. Shock horror. That's actually a really bad thing. We'll talk about that. For the past few weeks, you've noticed, a problem in the attendance of your team member Sally, who's been taking numerous sick leave days. As part of your duty of care, you question her on how she's going. Sally mentions that she's been feeling anxiety, stress, and that she's unhappy at work. And there's a frayed rug near the photocopier. So we've got all this information. So what we're going to do is have a look at what could be done. So step one is to identify what the hazard is. What is the risk? What could possibly go wrong? So I'll zoom up on this so you can kind of see it a bit more clearly. Step one, you've got to identify what the hazard is. Then you've got to consider what could happen if nothing's done about it. And then you've got to think about what you can do to fix the problem. And down here's another chart that sort of talks about level 1, level 2, level 3. So level 1 is the desired thing that you would always try to do, if it's possible. Eliminate the hazard. That's number 1 in the hierarchy of control, is what it's called. So when you're going through and doing this next exercise, you want to see if it's possible to eliminate the hazard. So, you know, you might not be able to remove the window, but I'm sure there's something else you can do if you can't eliminate, which might be substitute the hazard with something safer, or isolate the hazard from other people. So obviously moving the position of something would come under that. Level 3 is the weakest form of fixing a problem, which means putting on your, you know, if somebody's using spray adhesive, oh, I'll just put on a mask. But actually, that's not really good enough. Especially with spray adhesives, they're actually banned in TAFE completely. So the best thing with the spray adhesive is to enforce the ban. So in a workplace, nobody should be using those products unless it's in a specially designed spray booth with proper ventilation and really high-level particulate masks. Spray adhesives are a real hazard to your lungs. So they've got very fine particles which actually go into your lungs and cause damage, which is why they're completely banned at TAFE. So you'll find in a lot of workplaces that knowledge isn't necessarily there. So you might be the one, as in this case, who tries to bring that to the attention of your superiors. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to fill in a chart, and we're going to try and use this. This is the kind of things we're going to say. So each of those things we've looked at come under these kind of categories. So physical risks, ergonomics, so that's obviously the height of the desk and the chairs. Chemical would be the spray adhesive, I guess. Psychosocial, you know, Sally's having problems, that's a psychosocial risk. Biological, eating food at the desk, risk of contamination, bacteria, that's a biological risk that people are eating around the keyboards, which is one of the reasons we ask you not to eat in the classroom, and we say just bottled water's allowed in. So physical risk could be the frayed carpet. Then you have a risk matrix, which is how you decide what number, where does the risk sit in this matrix. So we'll go through that bit by bit. It's a little bit overwhelming looking at that, so don't look at it right now, but we're going to go through and use that risk matrix to decide what the risk matrix is. So we'll start, fill it in, so let's just do it. We're at Hornsby Design Studio, let's say. Yep. What's the date? Date completed. When's it? What's the work area? You know, it's KG. What are we? LG 01. Yeah. Classroom / design studio. Date completed would be today. And then scheduled review might be in 2 weeks or something like that. So you put a date in. Yeah, put a date in. Right, let's get on to this chart we're going to fill in. So identify the physical risk. What might go wrong? Who might be harmed? So the physical risk, if you just go back up to that list, which of these is the physical risk? Well, that one, definitely, isn't it? That's a physical risk. So you pop that into the chart that says physical risk. So physical risk is the frayed rug. You've identified it. And then what could possibly go wrong? Okay, we think that could be a trip hazard, yeah? Someone might trip over. what can be done to control the risk? Okay, we can eliminate, okay? That would be the first thing you try to do, remove the rug. If that was carpet and it wasn't possible to remove it, then you might repair, yeah? The likelihood of the risk, okay, this is where we go back up to the matrix. So we've identified the problem. Someone could trip over and injure themselves. So yeah, go up and have a look at the likely. You categorise it. Is it low, medium or high? Use your own opinion. I think it's maybe medium. Yeah, I think it's, you know, a frayed rug, it is a trip hazard. It is likely someone will trip over if it's not, you know, because there's a lot of movement around the room. So let's say you decide on high. Then you would put that you think, so you're going to use whatever terms. So this one they've said likely, they've given you an example. What does it say up here? We're also thinking it's likely, or are we just thinking it's possible? So slightly lower risk. Still a risk, but it's possible. So you could say that one's possible, yeah? It's not guaranteed that's going to happen. And then you go up. Is it a moderate or medium? So if we've said that's possible, and we're thinking it's a medium risk. It's not minor, it's not negligible, we're thinking medium. So that puts us at a number of 13 there, yeah? So you decide what kind of risk. If we think it's medium, then what is that? You go and have a look at the chart, and it looks like, if we're looking there, that we've said it's possible and it's medium risk, so that gives us a number 13. Additional controls would be making sure that people are wear covered shoes. That's at least going to reduce the risk of injury to your toes, for example. So if it's possible to do some other extra control, then it might be personal protection. But remember, that's weak. You wouldn't just do that. You would try to remove the hazard completely if possible. So let's look at ergonomic. So again, you do the same thing. You try to identify what are the risks up there. What did they say was a problem? So there's a couple there. These ones, no adjustable height, no adjustable desks. Okay, so that's pretty annoying. So it may lead to injury. It's actually, if they're not adjustable, I would say it's likely that people will develop RSI, repetitive strain injury. It's likely. Yeah? So again, you put in your ergonomic thing, put in what the risks are, and now what can be done. Again, you want to the highest level. What can we do with those, things that are not good and that we know pose a risk? So that's an ergonomic risk. What can we do about it? Any thoughts? Oops. What can we do about it, guys? Yeah, remember, eliminate is the always the first thing you want to do. I'll just remove that. So, eliminate. Replace the desks and chairs with adjustable. It's going to be an expensive one. I reckon that's a likely risk. If you don't do anything about it, and when you identify, remember you identify the risk, but you've also got to identify, what could go wrong. So in that you want to say workers could develop repetitive RSI, repetitive strain injury. They could end up with back problems, etc. So put in what you think are the problems there. And then potential consequence of the risk, go back up and have a look. Do we think it's a negligible risk? Is it something we can just kind of not worry about? No. Is it minor? I don't think it's minor, because it could derail careers, and as an employer, the people who develop RSI could come back and claim workers' compensation from you. You could get involved in a whole thing. So I think it's getting up to, like, it's pretty major.
Yeah.
It really requires them spending some money.
If it was severe, like someone did get an injury from it.
Well, the company risks being sued down the track, yeah. At the very least, you get WorkSafe Australia involved, and workers' compensation, and then even if the problem's developed and it's one person, it's still going to mean that person's not able to work. So that's going to cause economic problems for the company. So I would think it's probably at least it's major. So use your own judgment. So if you think it's likely and it's major, that puts it at a 20. So, again, you don't have to agree with me. You put your own thing in there. I think it's pretty major, and I think the risk is a 20. So is there anything else that can be done? What else could you do about that? You could, there's not much, is there? Really, I don't know what additional controls you could put in there. Maybe you could get footrests, as well as replacing,
Bring in your own sharing table.
supply footrests. You could replace the mouses with ergonomic ones, yeah? So something like that. So then we move on to the chemical, which pretty much is the things they've said in there to do with the spray. So sprays adhesives, that means everybody, it's in the common area, that means that everybody is being exposed to those fine particulates. So again, the company, if it allows that to continue, are at great risk of a very serious, again, workers' compensation, WorkSafe Australia being involved, WorkSafe New South Wales being involved. It's a pretty major risk. So, put that in the column. What do you think could happen from that exposure? What is the risk? What do you think can happen if people are exposed to fine particulates for a long time? Anyone?
We'll get sick.
What kind of illness do you think could develop from that? It's a fine particulate. There's probably a risk of lung disease. Think of all the things that are now banned because fine particulates. Yeah. So it's possible they could get, some kind of lung injury. At the very least, if you've got anybody who's asthmatic, they might have, might experience breathing difficulties. These, think about it, could be asthma, etc. So what do you do to control the risk? Any thoughts, guys? remember, eliminate is always our go-to. What would that mean? It would be ban. You know, get rid of any spray, adhesive. And what else could you do? Like if there's a need to have some kind of glue thing, what could you replace it with? What would be a safer alternative
For a spray.
instead of spray? Yeah, like find some other alternative glues. If it's just gluing, if that's what the spray adhesive is for, which again is a thing you do in graphic design. You sometimes have to create packaging mock-ups and you want to glue it together. You know, there's all sorts of other things you can glue with. You know, you have glue guns which can glue cardboard together. So why don't they invest in some glue guns? You still have to be careful using those. There's still some things you want to be careful with. If it's just a simple, you know, lighter material gluing, glue sticks would probably do it. There's paint on glue, you know, you've got paint on glues you can use. There's all sorts of stuff. So if you really insisted on having to use some kind of spray, you would have to have additional controls. Remember, that's the weakest thing. So at the very least, you could make sure that you had the correct masks, for example, which would be similar to the ones you wore in COVID, the PP3 ones, so that actually filter out fine particles. So you would think about that, and that could be something immediate you could do to mitigate the risk. But remember, we're always going to try to do the highest thing, eliminate the risk. Yeah. So likelihood of risk. Well, what do you think the likelihood of risk is? And we're talking about.
Possible.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you kept using spray adhesive in an open area where everybody's breathing it in, someone's going to be affected, especially if you're doing this for years and years. So you could put likely or almost certain. Use your own judgment. Do you think it's major or severe? Is it critical? So it's probably going to sit somewhere in here, either high, critical. Now I've modelled how to fill this in, so you now make your own judgment about whether you think it's major, whether you think it's almost certain or likely, and is it major, medium, major, severe, and put the corresponding number in to the chart based on your opinion, your understanding. So that's that one. Psychosocial, I have to talk a little bit about this. This is the one where your co-worker seems to be a little unhappy and taking lots of sick leave. Now, they talk about duty of care. So understanding what duty of care is. Does anybody know what duty of care is? No,
Mental health and
no, duty of care is just your responsibility as a worker with your colleagues. An employer has a duty of care. I might actually open up the, I've got an example one I've already filled in. Duty of care. This is from your student workbook, right? So I've just copied and pasted in here just so I don't have to scroll up and down to find it. Duty of care requirements. It applies to everyone within a workplace, including those not employed in the business. So that means if somebody came in to do some repairs today and they put up a ladder and you could see it was rickety and they looked like they were going to fall, even if that's a contractor, even if you don't know them and they're not an employee directly and they're not your colleague or they're not another student, you are there, you're observing it, you have a duty of care to call out a warning, to, you know, try to address the hazard, to do something, not to ignore it. So you'll hear, you know, this term bandied about, a person conducting business. A person conducting business could be you as a freelancer and working at home. You still have a duty of care if you order a courier to the house to pick up some design work and they have to, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff in your foyer and they trip over, well, you've failed in your duty of care, even though you're not employing them directly. So anyone that comes onto the premises, you have a duty of care to them. So it's a legal obligation, right, to ensure their health and safety and welfare, notice, and welfare of everyone in the working environment. So it could be a physical issue, as we've been identifying, but it also could be a psychosocial hazard. So a psychosocial hazard includes things like bullying, ensuring that workers are following, you know, safety regulations, a safe physical environment, but also this, protecting employees from discrimination, workplace bullying, harassment, holding clear job descriptions. Not having a clear job description is a really high stress thing, especially if you're a junior designer. You might find you've got basically 10 people above you and they're all coming to you and saying, can you do this, can you do this, can you do this? If there's a clear job description, you can point to it and say, hey, I just need to clarify this with the boss. What's actually got priority here, because I'm not sure that's in my job description. So it's a way of protecting yourself. So this is the things you've got a duty of care over, but it's also the psychosocial care. So if you notice somebody's unhappy or being bullied, you can't really ignore it. What can you do though? You might wonder, because you're not a psychologist, right? It's not your job to go and ask Sally personal questions, but it is your job to say something. Okay? Now, she could be being stressed because of her workload. It could be something in her personal life. That's actually none of your business. What do you think you can do, though, to fulfil your duty of care? Any idea?
Make sure the person's okay in the first place.
Yeah, you could ask them if they're okay, and well, then they say they're not. Remember, you're not a psychologist.
Eliminate the problem once.
It's not your job to eliminate or do anything about it. What's your responsibility? Not your job to provide that service, it's just your job to tell the person who's in charge. So if you have a look at your, the other thing I got you to download, which is that organisational chart. Now most companies, especially a larger one, would have an organisational chart, and you could figure out who you should be reporting safety issues, including things like bullying, or someone who seems to be suffering, you know, having a really bad day. So if you have a look here, you might be employed as an art officer, you might be employed as a web designer, you could be in this multimedia team, and these are what's called a line, and when you hear the term line manager, if you see an organisational chart, you can see who you might report to. So here you can see Julia Stickler is the one I was talking about in that scenario, who you would be sending off reports to. So that risk matrix we're filling in, she's your line manager, it tells you so, so that's who you might report it to. There's another one on the yellow line for the multimedia team, it's a different person. Leader Sofia Jankovic, if you're in the multimedia or marketing team, which graphic designers often are. So you might be grouped there. Or you might be down here under Julia Stickler's. See, these are probably graphic designers here, and they report to Julia. So that's the line manager. Notice that there's also a WHS officer, Stuart Purcell. So you could report your concerns to your line manager. If you're in a smaller studio with less people, it's just whoever's the boss. Basically, whoever's above you, you just got to let them know. Maybe it's in an email. Hey, I noticed Sally was extremely upset today. I don't know what the cause is, but I'm just letting you know I'm a bit concerned about them. That's it. That's your duty of care. Remember, you're not a psychologist. Sure, check in with them, are you okay? No, obviously they're not okay, they're crying, something's wrong. But again, you are not a psychologist, you don't need to get into their personal life. You simply need to let someone who has responsibility know. And the WH officer, if you think your line manager's, maybe not a very sympathetic person, you could go straight to the WHS officer if there is one. All right? So that's just to give you an idea. It's good to get familiar, like mostly these organisational charts will be on a website in whatever company you're employed at. But good to know how to work out what a line manager is, yeah? So my immediate line manager, for example, is Glenn. He's my boss, my immediate boss. There are several layers above him, but that's who I report to immediately. So if I have a concern about a student, I would let him know. Yeah? Okay, so keep going down the psychosocial one, fill that in. Use your own judgment. There's not really a right or wrong answer. What do you think the actual risk is? We've identified it's psychosocial, but what are the risks? What do you think could happen? If nothing's done and that person's in a stress state, what are the risks?
Self-harm.
Could be extreme, could be self-harm, could be they simply, end up quitting the job. And really it was something to do with the workload not being right, or the job description not clear. It might be something that's very easily addressed if somebody knows about it. But if nobody knows and nobody says anything, that person could just leave. Yeah, or they could actually do some sort of serious self-harm if it's very bad. So eliminate the risk. What are you going to do to control? You're going to report it. What's the likelihood of risk? Again, use your own judgment on that. Potential consequence, could it be quite severe? Again, go back and have a look at the matrix. Which one do you think? Do you think it's medium risk or major? Do you think it's severe? And then give that risk. Is it possible? Is it likely? Is it possible? What do you think? Is it almost certain? I don't know. Use your own judgment. I'm not going to tell you what to write so that you get used to using this. So remember, it's not really going to be a right or wrong answer as long as you've had a go at it. Is there any additional thing like, personal protective equipment's not really going to help us here. However, you could say something like, make sure job roles and responsibilities are clear. Could be something like that. So maybe that's part of the stress. If you found that out, that's something you could actually do. The last one on there is biological. So go back up and have a look. What are they doing? They're eating at the desk. Really bad. So that's biological. What's the risk? What could happen? Yeah, true. Germs, keyboards are notorious, and mouse, they're notorious for keeping germs and passing germs on to the next user. So what could you do to eliminate the risk? Well, you could probably enact what we have here at TAFE, which is a rule. So you would try and enforce the rule of no eating, or if there is no rule, you would discuss with the staff about having a rule for no eating and explain why. You could also make sure, the extra thing you could do probably here is make sure there's bacterial wipes on hand, so there's regular cleaning going on. But the consequence, the likelihood of the risk, what do you think? Is it likely? Is it possible? What are the possible consequences? Well, we've been through a serious virus. We know, some diseases are passed on via bacteria. Somebody sneezes on the keyboard and they're carrying a virus or something, and it gets passed on to the next person. So fill in that, and then that's the end of that. And I'll do a little pause here because that was quite a mouthful. Let you finish that, and then we'll go on to the